yes, the idea of wanting a dual national who wants to play for you, everybody wants that. I don't know why it's become like the prevailing narrative. However, where I'll push back and I'll always ask is, well, why aren't you their number one choice? We can have the pride and say, like, I want us to be your number one choice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to give a terrible analogy, like, I can't convince you to come to my house just based off the front door. If everybody knows, like, I haven't paid my power in 2 weeks, my plumbing has been shut off, and the pool water has been changed in 3 years, but we should have the cookout at my
Yeah.
house. Why?
No, for sure. I mean,
People see
I
that.
think it's actually an apt analogy. I think it's like it's Canada soccer needs to sort of win a lot of these kids over, because this is not a country with the pedigree of some other countries, like historically. And while there is an amazing generation coming up now, and a very promising national team, and to be frank, a good national team currently, like this, Canada's a good national team. Canada's better than a lot of these dual nats. Their other country of choice might not even be at the level Canada is currently at right now, but they most likely, almost certainly, in all cases, have more pedigree over the course of the last few decades, have more of a track record of being able to compete in major tournaments, that sort of stuff, right? So while Canada's program has grown exponentially, there really is no track record of success, and I think you have to kind of allow some of these kids to see the vision that they maybe didn't grow up with, because for many of them, they grew up wanting to play for Portugal, or they grew up wanting to play for Turkey, or they grew up wanting to play for Egypt, or they grew up, like fill in the country, because that's what they were exposed to at a young age, because really Canada was not on the map. So you're kind of starting from a losing place, in that you have to kind of let them see the vision, which they didn't necessarily grow up with. And to do that, you got to get them in your camp. You got to get them in your space. You got to get them around your trainers. You got to get them, playing some youth matches and tournaments, or whatever you need. You need to help them see the sort of vision of where this project is heading. It's not that different than club teams. When you have a club team that doesn't maybe have the history of a Manchester United or a Liverpool or a Bayern Munich, right? Like those clubs speak for themselves, but other clubs, when Leipzig was just starting out, like, how do we convince these players that this project is worthwhile, right? How do we get them in our space and like let them see what we're building and want them to be a part of it? That's very similar to the place that Canada's in right now. How do we get these kids to want to be a part of this, to believe in the project, to believe in where we're heading, to believe it's more than just a flash in the pan? And youth camps are the key for all of those. The key answer to all of those questions, in my opinion. So we've seen some really successful youth camps. I think largely we've seen underwhelming youth camps. Like the good ones kind of feel few and far between, because I just think generally that the teams aren't as prepared as they need to be when they go to some of these tournaments. And that's why a camp like this one, that we're not seeing the match, but we know what's going on, and it kicking off in like 3 minutes, is vital, right? They're going to get to see how they stack up against Costa Rica and Mexico before they have to eventually in February play this CONCACAF championship in Guatemala. So these camps are like, this wasn't existing before. So we have to acknowledge and give Canada Soccer some credit for, understanding that this is part of that equation, and that they need to have these camps more regularly, and they need to collect this talent more regularly. And we've seen some pretty notable dual nats even in this camp alone. I would say above all, Ibrahim Higazi, who is an Egyptian Canadian, and Victor Fung, who's an American Canadian. So those are two guys who certainly have interest from other nations. Higazi has actually represented Egypt very recently. So to get those guys in camp is a good sign. And it's a sign that I think Canada Soccer is going to take these dual nationals a little bit more seriously, and try to like push them into our space, to give them that experience. Again, similar to what Leipzig had to do in their first few years. Like, that's a club that existed, I think, in 2009 it started. Like, and now they're Champions League regulars, and they have all these big players. But like, it's one thing to have money, but it's another thing to like convince good players that this is a project you want to be a part of. And that's more where Canada really needs to focus, because it's not so much financial for Canada. They're not, it's not like a club situation, but you have to do that other part of the job that Leipzig had to figure out. How do we convince players to come here instead of to Dortmund, right? A club that has all this history, that has
Yeah.
a huge, fan base. That like, how do we convince them that this project is actually what's going to be best for their development, and they're going to have a chance to win, trophies and play in Europe here, and that's where we're
Yeah.
at. When you compare Canada to, even again in Egypt is not a world power in soccer, but Egypt has won African championships. Egypt has been to World Cups, right? Like Egypt has
Yes.
a much stronger history in this sport than Canada does. So although today Canada might be better than Egypt, like if they played tomorrow, I mean, I think Egypt's pretty good too, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if
Yeah.
Canada beat Egypt tomorrow. But that's not the point. The point is you're not competing against right now. You're competing against sort of decades of history, and you have to sort of be able to lay the vision of the project for the next 10, 20 years. And I think Herdman's visionary when it comes to that, and he leads the charge when it comes to all this stuff. But it really is about getting them into our youth spaces to allow them to sort of have that vision that will allow them to hopefully choose Canada.